Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton here from howtodrawcomics.net, and welcome to today's video, which is sponsored by Figurosity. Today, we're going to be using Figurosity to do some anatomy studies, and I'm also going to be showing you how I use the basic mannequin model structure to establish the proportions, placement, and pose of my characters from the get-go. So let's get straight into it here. I'm going to go over to my profile, and you can see that in my favorites, I've saved a few poses. I don't have many just yet, but I do have this one. And I thought that this particular pose would work as a perfect anatomy reference because, as you can see, we're looking at the figure straight on here, and we've got a nice, simple looking pose that is going to give us a very clear presentation as to where all the muscle groups are going to be throughout the human body as we work from it. Now, of course, up the top here we have our view type within Figurosity. One of the coolest things about this app that I love most. We've got the nude version, of course, and we've got the muscle version and the smooth version. And today, because we're doing some anatomy studies, I'm going to be activating the muscle version, the muscle view, which is going to allow us to, of course, draw from that reference and place all the various muscle groups throughout our figure as we draw it up. So I'm going to leave the these different street level bird's eye view as just a street level view because I want to look at the figure straight on here and again get a fairly clear look at where all the muscle groups are going to be sitting. But what I am going to activate, and again, this is one of the coolest things within Figurosity that I love most, is the 360-degree rotation, which when we load it up, and we'll load up the muscle view here, that's really the only one we want to be working within. I'll hit the load button, and that's going to load up this particular reference model and allow us, if I just click and drag here, in the viewport, it's going to allow us to rotate the model around. So as we're doing these anatomy studies, what we'll be able to have the ability to do is, as we draw up one anatomy study, we'll be able to draw out the next anatomy study from a different viewpoint, but of the same pose. One of the reasons as to why that, for me, is something which is useful is it helps us to make sense of how all the muscles kind of connect together from viewpoint to viewpoint. We were able to get a good look at how they relate with one another and how they sit next to one another, which is something which is important when it comes to understanding the human machine, which is really what we're looking at here. So I can't wait to get started. Let's jump into some of these anatomy studies. Alright, so here we are in Manga Studio, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to draw out the mannequin model. I'm going to show you a very basic structure for the human figure that you can replicate and draw out for yourself. And I love the mannequin model because it really does allow you to interpret the human body in all its complexity in a very simplified and rudimentary way. But what is valuable about being able to do this is it allows you to be able to comprehend what the human body might look like in a different pose from a different angle. It allows you to understand it on a more basic level so that you're able to store it away inside your mind in a much more optimal manner. And the reason as to why that's so useful is because if you are a comic book artist or a storyboard artist or even a concept designer and you don't necessarily have the exact reference there that you want to work from, but you've got a reference there that's kind of almost the exact composition or pose that you'd be looking for, you can kind of still use the reference, but then tweak it a little bit and change it up without having to worry about whether or not it's going to work out for you in the long run, because you'll have that basic understanding of the human body stored away inside your mind, so you can make a pretty accurate guesstimation as to how it's going to look if you do tweak it. Now, of course, when you get to those higher levels of comfortability with the human body, then you're able to kind of work without reference. You're able to take this basic mannequin model-like structure that you can see me constructing here on the page, and you can draw it in whatever pose you want, sometimes purely from your imagination, depending on how familiar you are with it. And it doesn't take a whole lot for you to become very familiar with exactly how it's structured. Now, if we're looking at the components that this basic mannequin model is made up of, you can see that we've got the head there, and it's really nothing more but an oval. And you can see that I've got some cross contours there, a horizontal line that runs around the equator, and another vertical line that runs straight down the middle of the face, and that kind of shows us where the front of the head would be. But other than that, it's relatively simple. And then, of course, you've got the torso, and what's the torso made up of? Well, really 3 components. You've got the chest there, which is essentially just a 3D vest, or at least that's the way in which I like to think about it. And so I like to kind of nickname it as the chest vest because, again, that's essentially what it is. And then you've got the pelvis. Now, the pelvis kind of looks just like a pair of underwear, and so I kind of refer to that as the pelvis panties. And, by nicknaming the different bits and pieces that go into the mannequin model in this way, it just kind of helps me to remember the shape a little bit easier. And then, if we look at the limbs, the legs, and the arms, well, really all that they are very subtly shaped cylinders that are joined together at the joints by spheres. And there's not a whole lot more to them other than that. And it's good to try not to think of them as being any more complex than these very basic forms. Now, in the middle of the torso, which I forgot to mention, between the chest vest and the pelvis panties, we've got this malleable tube of muscle that essentially allows the body to rotate and twist in a variety of different ways. It's really responsible for a majority of the movement throughout the human body. It, in fact, gives us momentum as we move and propels us forward. So there's a lot of strength and power within the core muscles that are situated within the muscle tube that essentially joins those 2 major masses in the torso together. Now I'm adding some shape to the face there. You can see that I've kind of defined the jawline a little bit more clearly, and I've also added in some ears as well, resized the head ever so slightly, and that brings me to my next point, the real advantage that the mannequin model offers. It allows you, from the get-go, to be able to capture the 3 major figure drawing principles that you need to keep in mind for a successful character illustration right from the very beginning. Those principles are the proportions of the character, their placement, and their pose. And this is exclusively what the mannequin model allows you to establish before anything else. And it's important that we're not really focused on anything else beyond that, because really that's all that matters at this initial foundational stage. Now, what you can see me doing here with the red contours that are going to wrap around these forms is I'm trying to show you the 3-dimensional qualities of those forms that we're dealing with here. And it's important to be able to think of each and every one of these building blocks that make up the mannequin figure in a 3-dimensional way. You want to understand the forms that you're dealing with, because by understanding those forms, and in all of their simplicity, really, and the way in which they link together, their scale in relation to one another, and how they move, what we're able to do is we're able to turn them around inside our mind much more easily and interpret them from a variety of different angles. Now, we are working from a reference here. Again, we've got the reference model set up in Figurosity, the right-hand side of the screen here. And that's fantastic. That's one of the best things about Figurosity, is you've got all these poses to pick from, so that if you're ever stuck for references, well, you've got some there to help you out when you need them. But sometimes what's going to give your character that extra level of believability what's going to make them look even more convincing is when you're not only able to see the reference and copy it just by eye, but you're able to understand it in a more three-dimensional way. And when you're able to do that, it makes you a much more dynamic artist. It makes you more flexible. You could take this very same pose and maybe, for example, you, instead of having both arms rested, maybe you wanted one of those arms holding up a gun, maybe, for example. Or maybe you wanted one of them throwing a fist. Or maybe you wanted one of the legs kind of, maybe you wanted to reposition them for one reason or another. Because let's face it, when it comes to illustration, we want the ability to be able to draw our characters in whichever context we choose. We want and really deserve that power as the artist. And the great thing about having this simplified representation of the human figure is that it's not that hard to be able to do that. You're able to take this interpretation of the arm, which is essentially translated into a series of simplified cylinders, and you're able to reposition it into whatever composition you want it to be in. It's really ultimately up to you. So you can build on top of your references. You're able to build on top of these poses that are pre-made that you're working from and really own them. Turn them into your own illustration and use them within the context of your idea, rather than confining your idea to the context of your reference material. So now that we've finished up our mannequin model, what I've done is I've cloned it in preparation for doing a full-on, all-out anatomy study. And that's really the reason that I'm working from the reference model that has presented to us the entire muscle structure throughout the female figure here, because I'm essentially going to copy exactly what I'm seeing there, just to help me refresh my memory as to where all the major muscle groups are going to be situated throughout the human body. And this is very important to be able to do because, of course, the sheer complexity of the muscles and the way in which they're composed and connected throughout the human body is just so much for us to remember and store away inside our memory bank. So every now and then, we need to go back and refresh our memory a little bit, update those files that have been stored away, because sometimes they get a little bit corrupt, and you don't always necessarily remember them at the level of resolution that you once remembered them at. Maybe you become a little less confident as to where the muscles need to go. Now, here is a good example. You can see that I've just erased the breasts of the female figure that I'm working on here, and I'm actually lowering them because it's become a habit of mine to draw them a little bit higher, but in actual reality, that's not really where they should be sitting. They should be sitting a little bit lower than I've gotten into the habit of drawing them. So this is why these anatomy studies are really, really good, because they help you to keep what you already know about anatomy, regardless of what level of experience you're at. Maybe you're a complete newbie and you haven't learned a whole lot of anatomy at all or practiced it. Or maybe you're more advanced and you've been studying anatomy for years like myself. But there's still aspects that you're going to be a little rusty on, despite the fact you have studied anatomy before, despite the fact that you do know it pretty well, because we let our guard down from time to time, and we let muscle memory kick in, and we kind of start to automatically do this stuff without necessarily paying attention. And although our brain will kind of store all of our past experiences away inside our memory bank in a fairly accurate manner, sometimes that experience and the memory of those experiences and all the knowledge we've gained from those practice sessions, it becomes distorted. And we don't quite remember it in exactly the same way that we were supposed to remember it over time. And so we need a bit of a refresher. And that's what these anatomy studies are absolutely perfect for an artist who is more experienced and for a complete beginner especially. And this is one of the things that I did way, way back in order to really give my figure drawing abilities a boost and to get my anatomy handled. Because, I mean, when you look at the human body, even the muscles in the arms here that I'm drawing in, it looks like a complex mess of different shapes and compositions of various muscle groups. And it's very difficult to know how all of this ties together without studying it for a little while. And you're not going to get it the first time. It's going to take you a little while and a lot of practice sessions where you're just sitting down and you're doing studies exactly like the one that I'm showing you here. And this is really what I'm thinking about when I sit down to draw any character. Again, whether it be for just a regular old illustration of a character or a comic book or a storyboard or a concept. I started out with the Mannequin model first and foremost because that helps me to make sure that the foundations are solid, that the structure of the character is sound. And that's really the best thing that you've got to predict the success of your character drawings. And then, of course, I'll stack the anatomy on top of that. And that's really, again, the order of events that happen along the road to a character illustration and its completion. And ultimately, when we have finished up on this particular anatomy study and we jump into the more fast, rough-looking anatomy studies where we'll start to actually rotate this figure around and draw it from a multitude of different viewpoints, I'll be thinking about this. And I know that we're really taking our time here to make sure that we're getting these muscles placed in exactly the right position, that we're getting them drawn up and nice and neatly packed in there together at the right scale. But once you've done this enough times and you've had enough repetition, you've got that mileage behind you, you're going to get faster and faster at this. You're going to eventually have done this so many times that you know it off by heart. You know where all the muscles go. And really, whenever you sit down to do an anatomy study such as this, it's going to be a good refresher for you. You'll know most of it. And it won't take you long to become familiar with the anatomy of the human body. Say, for example, that you spend a week on it. You spend maybe one day on the face, and you get to know how the face is structured and maybe some of the anatomy within that, just to help you out with how it moves and the various expressions that it's capable of. And then maybe you move your way down to the neck and torso and you spend a good day just knocking out the muscles for it. Maybe you spend a few days on that. Maybe you spend a day drawing out the front of the human torso and then the back. And you get really familiar with how all the muscles kind of fit together around it. And then maybe a few days later, you start to get to work on the anatomy within the arms. And, you figure out where the biceps and the triceps sit and then how the forearm muscles all fit together, which is very, very complex, as you can see. I don't even know if I know all the forearm muscles at this point and how they stick together. But then you might move on to the legs. And you'll get to know where all the major muscle groups sit around them. And eventually, after a week or maybe two, maybe you might want to take your time with it, and that's totally okay. In fact, the more time that you take with this, sometimes the better, because it'll stay with you for longer. You'll be studying it on a much deeper level. So don't rush through this. Really try to take your time with it. It'll be worth it, because the more time that you can spend on it, the better, the more that you'll get out of it. Each practice session, if you can get into it on a very deep level, and you can really absorb the information that you're learning as you go throughout these practice sessions, you'll find that although it might take you a little bit longer to absorb this stuff, when you do absorb it, it'll stay with you for much longer, and you'll essentially be branding it into your brain, and it'll stay with you. again, it'll be that much more impactful of a practice session, because if you just rush through it, well, what's going to happen? Maybe you'll take in some things, but you'll miss a whole lot of other stuff that you could have picked up on if you're paying a little bit more attention. So it really only takes you a week to get to know the basic muscle structure of the human body. Again, maybe 2 if you're taking your time with it. But after that, it's all just repetition. You're just repeating what you already know, what you're already familiar with, to really refine your ability to make sure that you're able to capture the correct shape for the muscles. You're upgrading to those higher tiers of knowledge. You're kind of getting into more advanced anatomy at that point, where you're figuring out, well, okay, when the human body begins to move and transition from one pose to the next, well, what effect does that have on the muscles? How do they stretch and compress? And what are their relationships with one another? How do they actually fit together around the body and intertwine with one another in order to power it forward? Because really, what you're looking at here is the human machine and all the bits and pieces that go into it in order to power it. That's really what gives the human body the ability to move, is our muscles, of course. So now, as you can see, I'm adding in some very rough details there around the foot and the leg. I'm not getting too detailed or specific on this. I am trying to keep it fairly clean for you. This is the kind of study that you'd want to do if you were a beginner. You'd really want to sit down, take your time with it, and figure out exactly where all these muscles need to go and how they should look, and do your very, very best to get it right. And that doesn't mean that you will get it right the first time that you go through one of these studies, but you'll get it closer and closer and closer as you put in the effort and you continue pushing yourself to really pay attention to exactly how these muscles should look and where they should go. We're talking about not just where they should go and what size they should be, but we're talking about their relationships to one another, their proportional relationships, how big one muscle is in comparison to the next. These are all important considerations that you don't necessarily need to consciously be aware of, because you will pick them up with time and you will understand what they entail just through the experience of going through these studies. But it is something that that's important to be aware of. And now I'm just going around and I'm placing in some very light line weights just to ensure that the different muscle groups throughout the human figure here are nicely defined. And again, I would highly suggest that you go through and you do one of these studies for yourself, regardless of the level that you're at. Just really challenge yourself. Ever since I discovered Figurosity, I've been doing these figure drawing and anatomy studies myself. I've picked it up again because I know how much of an impact it had on my drawing abilities and my ability to be able to draw characters at all when I first started. I remember doing so many figure drawing studies. I'd spend half an hour to an hour every single day. I made it a habit. And I'd do those 30-second quick poses that we saw in the previous video of Figurosity, where we went over the overview of Figurosity and I showed you the quick posing tool within it. I'd do those every single day for half an hour. And because they were 30-second poses, I'd get 120 poses out of that session. And I'd draw them down on the page. The next day I'd do another 120. And by the time the week was done, I had hundreds and hundreds of poses that I'd drawn out in my sketchbook. By that point, it was impossible for me not to have a fairly intimate connection with the human body and the way that it moved. I was extremely familiar with it, and I was comfortable at being able to move it around on the page and think of it in the same way that an animator might think of it. And again, when you can interpret the human body in the very basic forms that we just went over when we were constructing the Mannequin model, it makes it that much easier to animate it inside your mind's eye, to be able to comprehend it. And again, that comprehension, which is, again, understanding what you're seeing, not just seeing it and copying it, but actually understanding what it is you're drawing, that's really the key to becoming a dynamic artist that isn't just confined to merely what you can see and observe, but you're able to create things purely from your imagination. So now what you just saw me do is I rotated the model there so that I could draw it from a different point of view. We're still dealing with the same pose, we're just drawing it in a different point of view. And this is one of the coolest aspects about Figurosity, is the really cool and nifty 360-degree turn function that it comes available with, where you can pick any model and any pose, whether it's and you can pick whether it's in bird's eye view or worm's eye view, or whether it's eye level like this one, and you can rotate it. Now, the beauty about that is once you've drawn up the figure in one pose, you can turn it and you can draw it up from a different point of view in the same pose. Why is that valuable? Well, it means that now you're practicing your ability to be able to comprehend the human figure on a much more deeper level, where you fully understand it in a three-dimensional sense. Because now you're watching it as it rotates. You're not just drawing it in a flat view anymore. I mean, you are. And you are observing it in a flat view, but you're able to actually rotate it. So now you understand how each one of these poses that you're drawing relates to the next. And what's important about that is when you initially start out to draw a study from a reference, and you may get that reference from Google Images or, some other application. I know a lot of people have bought up DAZ Studio, which is great, and I've used DAZ Studio before. It is a very nifty application. Haven't used it for a very long time, but funnily enough, the models that are featured within Figurosity are actually bought from DAZ, and they're adjusted and rendered, and they're imported into it for all your figure drawing needs. And a lot of people have kind of brought up the fact that, okay, Figurosity isn't as customizable as DAZ. You can't pose the models yourself, and, but at the same time, that's why I love Figurosity. I love it for its compact convenience. When I jump into Figurosity, I don't want to spend half an hour posing a character. I just want to get to figure drawing. If I'm doing a full-on figure drawing session, and we're talking the 120 poses that I mentioned before, I don't really want to have to spend time posing 120 poses on my own. I just want it there and ready to go. I want to hit a button and I want to start drawing. And so Figurosity is less for, 3D artists, and maybe even artists who have a particular idea in mind already and they want to kind of have a 3D model there so that they can manipulate it and pose it to be an exact reference of what they want it to be. If you're using Figurosity, use it for its figure drawing capabilities and, of course, these anatomy studies, because that's really what it's there for, and the kind of person that it's going to serve best. That's its purpose. So figure drawing, if you want that, jump into Figurosity. If you want the models and you want to be able to manipulate and modify them yourself, jump into DAZ Studio for sure. A lot of people said that DAZ is free, and Figurosity is free as well. I mean, the free version, you get over 4,000 different poses that you can reference. But just like DAZ Studio, there is a premium package there, premium subscription that you can take advantage of if you want the extra perks. And that's completely up to you. If you use the free version of Figurosity and you find it useful like I have, then go for the $2.99 a month subscription. It's extremely cheap. Again, DAZ Studio is the same. I think there's a default model that comes free with DAZ Studio. Again, I haven't used it in a very long time, but every additional asset that you get for DAZ Studio, and the different models that you want to you want to get for it, they all cost money, and that can definitely stack up over time as well. And, again, Figurosity is just so convenient for what we're doing here on the screen. And you can see that as I draw up these poses and I rotate the model around to draw it from these different points of view, that I'm starting out with that very basic mannequin model structure. Now, this is a much looser and rougher version of that, and you'll find that the more familiar you get with the mannequin model, the more loose you'll tend to draw it. You'll start to incorporate the additional level of energy and gesture within the pose that the mannequin model will establish right off the bat, and that's very important as well, but something that can really only come through practice. And then over the top of that mannequin model, of course, I'm placing the muscle structure, and the muscle structure, you'll notice, is confined to the proportions of the mannequin model that we've already established. The muscles are confined to the pose that the figure is in. And so everything is built on top of that basic mannequin model structure, which is why it's something that should not be underestimated. It's really at the heart of what is going to make your figure drawing successful. What is going to make the character that you're drawing work and look accurate or look completely wrong. So you want to make sure that you do try to really focus on becoming familiar, becoming friends with the mannequin model and getting to know it, becoming so comfortable with it that you can draw it in any pose that you need it to be drawn in without breaking a sweat. Because this stuff really is it's like going to the gym. You can call it drawing gym if that makes it easier to remember, because as I was saying before, no matter what level of experience you're at, if you don't use your skills, you'll lose them. So you want to make sure that your drawing abilities are well tuned by doing these studies on a regular basis, just as a warm-up even. Maybe before you sit down to, start out your day, and maybe you work as a comic book artist, for example, or you work as a concept designer, and you got a bunch of stuff that you have to do, but maybe you get into work a little bit earlier, and you rip out one of these poses, or maybe a couple of them. They are quite fast to do. And you can see how loose I'm keeping them. And maybe you only get to the mannequin model stage. Maybe you do manage to get the muscles drawn in on top while you're at it as well. The more, the merrier. But, ultimately, at the same time, I think what's important is that if you can just kind of remind yourself how the human body fits together and just use it as a warm-up, because it's an excellent warm-up just for getting you in the mood to draw, you'll find that it's very beneficial for you and that you get a ton out of it. You won't ever really have to worry about or get nervous about drawing the human figure because you will be so comfortable with it. And as I said, because these are so fast, especially if you combine what you're seeing here with the 30-second quick poses within Figurosity, what you'll find is you're able to get a pose down for a character. I call them prototype poses because usually you got to do a few of them just to see what will work best. You can get them down very, very fast, and you're used to getting them down fast because you've been doing these 30-second quick poses. So, it's something that's well worth doing, and I think it's one of the best things that Figurosity.com brings to the table. If you did enjoy this video and you found it useful, then I highly urge you to check out Figurosity.com. Again, try out the free version. It's got more than enough awesome tools and value to bring to the table just with the free version. And then if you want the perks, of course, you can upgrade your subscription. But I hope that you got a ton of value out of this video. Try out some of these exercises for yourself. Try drawing up the mannequin model. See how you go. Again, it's at the crux of any well-drawn, properly structured character, so it's highly worth your time to practice it and to get to know it. And then, finally, what I do after that is get into some anatomy stuff. Now, I know it can be intimidating, but just take your time with it. try to do your best. Get those muscles drawn in over the top of your mannequin models and try to make sure that they're drawn in at the correct shape, the correct scale, and that they're interlinked and relating to one another in the correct way. And before you know it, with enough repetition, with enough practice, you got to believe me when I tell you this, you will get 100% comfortable with the human body. However, it will challenge you just enough to keep you hooked on drawing, so you'll still have to practice it every day. It's one of those journeys that never ends. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep on creating, keep on practicing, and I'll see you in the next video.